Okay, so welcome to everybody. We have one more session of the Logical Universalist webinar. In this webinar, we have either paper published in the journal Logical Universalist or books published in the book series Studies in Universal Logic. So today we will have a book, present a book published in this book series. And we will have a presentation of the book series by the managing editor of this book series at Springer, Knowles. After that, we will have a presentation of the Schopenhauer Society, which is a society related with the topic of today. Then we will have the presentation of the book by the editor of the book, Lemanski. And then we will have a talk by Laura Follesa presenting a chapter of the book. And the chair of the session is Francesco Paoli, who is a member of the editorial board of the book series Studies in Universal Logic. So please, Francesco.
Yeah, thank you, Jean-Yves. So as you said, today's main talk will be preceded by three short presentations. And the first presentation will be given by Dana Knowles, responsible editor for the series Studies in Universal Logic at Berkhäuser. So please, Dana.
Your microphone is off.
You're muted.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just going to share my screen really quickly. I have some slides prepared. And okay. All right. Good day, everyone. Thanks so much for having me today. My name is Dana Knowles, and I'm an editor at Berkhäuser working with the Mathematics Books Group. And I'm based in the New York office, though still working remotely out of my home office for the time being. And I work on the Studies in Universal Logic book series, along with our series editor, who you all know, Jean-Yves. And I just wanted to talk about the series for a few minutes, highlight a few of our recently published titles, and mention a couple of our forthcoming titles as well. And so a little bit about the series. It publishes books regarding all aspects of logic, mathematical, philosophical, historical, semiotical, computational, and anthropological from an international perspective. And this corresponds to the work that Jean-Yves has been doing, particularly around the creation of World Logic Day in 2019, which has been recognized by UNESCO since its inception. And in this sense, the book series is quite unique. And as a result, the books published appeal to a variety of different readers and researchers. And the series publishes several different book types, primarily research monographs, textbooks, and contributed volumes. And now I'm just going to briefly show some slides highlighting our most recently published title, starting with the most recent, which is Logical Skills. And I've just included a cover of the photo here, as well as some features of the book, which I've done for all of the recently published titles in the series. And you can also view these highlights in the full book description on the series page on the Springer website. And this edited volume will be presented during the webinar that's scheduled for December 15th later this year. And the next title, Sequence and Trees, an Introduction to the Theory and Applications of Propositional Sequent Calculi, is a textbook that was presented recently at the June 16th webinar. And the next book is Decidability of Logical Theories and Their Combination. This is also a textbook in the series, and this volume is scheduled to be presented at the September 8th webinar, a couple months from now. And last but not least, we have Language, Logic, and Mathematics in Schopenhauer, edited by Jens Lemanski, who will be presenting it later today during the webinar. And next, I just wanted to mention a couple of forthcoming titles in the series. Both of these volumes are co-edited by Jean-Yves. The Exoteric Square of Opposition collects papers presented at the Sixth World Congress on the Square of Opposition, which was held in Crete in 2018. And Logic in Question is a volume that collects papers related to the workshop of the same name, Logic in Question, which has been taking place annually at the Sorbonne University in Paris since 2011. And finally, I just wanted to share a quick update for anyone who might not already be aware that as of this year, the Studies in Universal Logic book series is now indexed by Scopus. The series was accepted earlier this year, and it typically takes some time for content to appear on the Scopus site because they just need time to prepare the data feed. But I did check earlier this week and it's there now, so it's live, which is really great to see. And those are all the updates that I had prepared, unless anyone has any questions or unless Jean-Yves would like to add anything about the series.
No, that's fine. I mean, everybody is welcome to submit a manuscript, of course.
Okay, so thank you very much, Dana, for your presentation. Are there questions or remarks? You can raise your hand or simply unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I would like to buy those books, mainly Sequent and Trees. I've been looking for it mainly in Amazon, but I couldn't buy it. If there is a sort of advice, because I really would like to have it and read it. Also the other ones, also Logical Skills and the others that have been mentioned.
Yes, I can add a link to the series page in the chat box if that would be helpful. And it'll take you straight to the series page and you can view and purchase all the books from there. So
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
More questions or comments? So if not, we thank Dana again and proceed to the next presentation. As it is customary for these seminars, there will now be an address by the president of an institution that is directly connected with today's talk. So let me give the floor to Matthias Kossler, who is the president of the Schopenhauer Society. Please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to present the Schopenhauer Society a little bit. As you said, I am the president of the Schopenhauer Society and the director of the Schopenhauer Research Center at the University of Mainz. I will try to give you a very short overlook on the history of the Schopenhauer Society and the structure, because it's an international society, and of the tasks of the society. The Schopenhauer Gesellschaft, this is the name, German name, is one of the oldest philosophical societies in Germany, founded 1911 by Paul Deussen, a philosopher, Indologist, and friend of Nietzsche. It is existing since 110 years without interruption. A year after, in 1912, the first issue of the Schopenhauer Yearbook appeared, which bit by bit changed from an internal society yearbook to the central international organ of Schopenhauer research. 10 years after the foundation of the society, that means exactly 100 years ago, it's an anniversary, the Schopenhauer Archives were founded by the Schopenhauer Society in cooperation with the Frankfurt Municipal Library, which is now today the University Library. The purpose of the Schopenhauer Society is to stimulate and to promote the study of and understanding of the philosophy of Schopenhauer. Its main activities, therefore, are the organization of conferences, lectures, competitions, and exhibitions, the edition of Schopenhauer's works, of the yearbook and other publications, and the support of research and teaching. Today, the Schopenhauer Gesellschaft is an international society with 6 divisions in 4 continents and 3 local associations. I just want to show this by a presentation. I hope it's visible.
Not yet, unfortunately.
Not yet.
Not yet. Oh, so I have to.
Yes, I think now.
Now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now
Yes,
we can see it.
Thank
now
you.
it is. Yeah.
Just to give a little bit view on the structure. This scheme I have made here refers also to the interference between private institutions, which are these green items, and with academic organizations. So I have here the Schopenhauer Gesellschaft and a North American division, just new, Australasian division, Danish division, Indian division, with an Assam subdivision, and Brazilian division, where the Schopenhauer research is very strong. And there's also academic part of this Schopenhauer research in Brazil, which is in the realm of the association of the National Association of Philosophers in Brazil. Then we have an Italian division, which has in parallel to the Schopenhauer Research Center. This is a Schopenhauer Forschungsstelle in Mainz, which works very intense together with the Schopenhauer Gesellschaft. This is a private institution and the cooperation with a university. And similar, it's in Italy with the cooperation between the Italian division of the Schopenhauer Gesellschaft and the Centro Interdipartimentale di Ricerca su Schopenhauer e la sua scuola. That means the Center of Research about Schopenhauer and his school. The Schopenhauer School is also a remarkable a subject of research there. Some names like Meinländer, Bahnsen, and also Nietzsche is understood within the signification of Schopenhauer's school. Another cooperation is between the University of Mainz and the University of Frankfurt, where the Schopenhauer Archives are situated, and the Schopenhauer Gesellschaft. And in the Schopenhauer Archives in Frankfurt, there's also connected with new Schopenhauer Studio, which also is able to present Schopenhauer philosophy in the public. Different institutions in this framework are also responsible for the periodicals and series concerning Schopenhauer. In Brazil, it's the online journal Voluntas. In Mainz, Schopenhauer Jahrbuch and the series Beiträge zur Philosophie Schopenhauers. In Italy, there's a series with the title Schopenhaueriana, and 2 main projects at the moment of the Schopenhauer Society in connection with universities is the Schopenhauer Digital, which is an internet platform for editing the handwritten estate of Schopenhauer, which is not yet completely transcribed. And the other big task is the historic critical new edition of the works of Schopenhauer, made from the Schopenhauer Research Center together with the Schopenhauer Archives. The Schopenhauer Gesellschaft has three particular features which set it apart from other philosophical societies. The first one is, since Schopenhauer has been neglected in academic philosophy, at least from the 30s to the 80s of the last century, the research on his philosophy was done almost completely by the Schopenhauer Society and not by universities. To a certain degree, this is still the case even today in Germany, while in other countries, for example, in Brazil and Italy, it looks a bit better in regard to university studies. And this is the reason why there's a necessary collaboration between private institutions and universities in different kinds of different ways of cooperation. The second feature I would mention is that more than other philosophical societies, the Schopenhauer Society addresses members not belonging to the academic philosophy. There are many members from different scientific fields like natural sciences, jurisprudence, engineering, psychology, but also artists, businessmen, and people of all classes as members of this society. On the one hand, this is an advantage regarding the mediation between academic philosophy and the public. On the other hand, it interferes with the recognition in academic philosophy, which is, as I said, a problem of the Schopenhauer research in general. The third feature is that the history of the Schopenhauer Society or Schopenhauer Gesellschaft has been studied in a way that has been called exemplary in the field of the history of scientific societies. There are two books on this subject, namely a German book, Schopenhauer im 20. Jahrhundert, Geschichte der Schopenhauer Gesellschaft, Schopenhauer in the 20th century and the history of the Schopenhauer Society. And another book in Italy, appeared in Italy, in Lotta per Schopenhauer, La Schopenhauer Gesellschaft Francesca Filosofica e Manipolazione Ideological, in English, in Fight for Schopenhauer, the Schopenhauer Society between philosophical research and ideological manipulation between 1911 and 1948. I think this is all I can say now in short about the Schopenhauer Research Center. If you have questions, I will answer. It will be a pleasure for me. And if you like to inform you further at the present state of the Schopenhauer Society and its activities, I have the two homepages. The one homepage is that of the Schopenhauer Society and the other of the Schopenhauer Research Center in Mainz. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. Are there questions or remarks? So I see a question, Müller Thais. I know it's just a clapping hands, sorry. Okay. Questions, remarks?
Maybe I have a question to Professor Kossler.
Please.
Do you know, is there any research center or division or maybe research project on Schopenhauer and the philosophy of the contemporary philosophy? So do you know any particular or specific research center who is working on that?
No,
at the present. No.
I'm sorry that there's no research center.
Or project, maybe, yeah, no. So
there are some
people.
Almost most book projects aim at the actualization of Schopenhauer's philosophy. That's clear.
Okay.
But these are there's no specific institution.
Okay, just because you mentioned the school, and so I was wondering if the school is
The Schopenhauer school is
just 19th century and early 20. Thank you.
You can make it longer to the present, to Paul Deussen and into the 20th century, but
Of course, yeah.
Unfortunately, one could investigate more intensely the connection between Schopenhauer and the analytical philosophy. That I think this is still, and also in logic, which the book of Jens Lemanski shows that there are more possibilities as they are
yeah, you're right.
done now or run.
Thank you.
Thank you. So more questions or comments? Yeah, this is a proper hand raised. Michal?
Yes, thank you
Please.
very much. This is just a remark because I see that there are some participants from Poland here. And I wanted to say, this is not official, but in Warsaw, there is also the German Philosophy Lab at which we also do Schopenhauer. So if you would be interested in that, it's the German Philosophy Lab at the University of Warsaw Faculty of Philosophy. In German, it's Forschungsstelle für Deutsche Philosophie. In Polish, it's Pracownia Studiów nad Filozofią Niemiecką. So if you would like to get in touch with someone from Poland, we are there as well. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. There is a participant who wrote a question in the chat. Can you kindly tell a little bit about the Indian division?
Sorry, I thought. Yes, the Indian division of the Schopenhauer Society was founded in 2003 and had made bigger congresses every 5 years. At the moment, we have, unfortunately, the director of the Indian division is yes, cannot work as well because of sickness. At the moment, there's a pause in the activities of the Indian division, and I hope this will be better in the next years.
Okay, so another participant asked also about the Brazilian division, which you mentioned is very strong, right?
Yes, Brazilian division is very active, and there are different groups, research groups on Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, the relationship between Schopenhauer and Nietzsche. And in Brazil, there's every 2 years a large congress, which is called the Schopenhauer Colloquium, International Schopenhauer Colloquium, which normally is 1 week, a whole week with many participants. And there's also, as I mentioned, the journal Voluntas, the online journal where you can publish and read articles on Schopenhauer.
Okay, so thank you. Are there more questions? So if not, we thank Matthias Kossler again.
Thank you very much.
And let us now move to the main topic of today, which is the presentation of the book Language, Logic, and Mathematics in Schopenhauer, that has recently appeared, as already recalled, in the Studies in Universal Logic series. We have here the editor of the book, Jens Lemanski. So please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. I hope you can see my slides. I prepared just a few slides in order to give some notes of how this book came into being, and I can go very much back in time to explain that. I hope you can see the slides in the moment. Is that the case?
Yep.
Yes. So I can, well, if I want to go to back in time, I can say that it starts as I went to school in the 1990s. I got an edition of Schopenhauer's World as Will and Representation, which is the main book of Schopenhauer. And what caught my attention at that time were the diagrams you see here on the left side for logic and on the right side for math. And that is something which distinguished Schopenhauer clearly from other philosophers, I would say. And I then read the book several times as a student and understood a little of the diagrams, maybe perhaps that I was more interested in other topics than that. But when I gave my first logic seminars for beginners at the university in the end of 2000s, I came back to a book that I partly read before, and that was Quine's method of logic. I guess most of you know that. And I remembered that I had already seen similar diagrams as in Quine in Schopenhauer's work, and started to get more and more interested in this diagrams here. So, and at some points I came across Schopenhauer's lecture manuscripts, which you see here, first published in 1913. For which there was hardly any research at that time. And these lectures Schopenhauer gave in Berlin in the 1820s contained numerous chapters on logic, the size of an entire book for about 200 pages, I would say. And these chapters are full of various kinds of diagrams. So, for example, you see here some partition diagrams here, and you see here some Venn-type diagrams. So there are many of them in that book. And you also see here a lot of logic diagrams connected to each other, these circle diagrams here, and so on. So it was, I think, in 2016 that I was talking to Jean-Yves at the Symmetry Society in Santorin, the organizer Yannis Vandoulakis. I saw them also here, and we discussed there at some length the influence of Schopenhauer on Wittgenstein, and I suggested that we organize a conference on Schopenhauer's philosophy of language, mathematics, and logic. And then in 2017, the conference took place at the University of Hagen. I started another call for paper after that, collected the papers, and in 2020, so there were some pictures here from the conference, and in 2020 we published here this book, Language, Logic, and Mathematics in Schopenhauer, starting with a chapter of Matthias Kossler, and later the last but not least one by Laura, which we will hear today. So I can say that since 2017, this research on Schopenhauer's philosophy of language, logic, and mathematics has been booming in some areas. This is partly because the historical and systematic topics in this field are numerous. And until the mid-2010s, one almost completely ignored this research field. And historically, for example, one can name 3 schools in the field of logic and heuristic in which Schopenhauer was intensively discussed in the beginning of the 20th century. For example, the Law of Warsaw School, the Vienna Circle, and the School of Münster, for example. So, and systematically, there are numerous starting points. Just listed here a few of them which are discussed in the moment. For example, here in the field of logic and heuristics, it's of course philosophy of logic, logic for law, that is heuristic. It's applied to ludics, for example, from some French scientists, and for cellular automaton from the Japanese society, and Schopenhauer fuzzy logic. There were some American researchers working with the diagrams in a fuzzy way, and meta logic, that was something Jean-Yves wrote a chapter on, and logical geometry, that is mainly done by Belgian scientists, and naturalness in logic is one of the topics which are discussed. And one of the most exciting areas, I would say, is of course the study of how Schopenhauer applied his logic to his own philosophy. I would say the great advantage of working with Schopenhauer is not only the variety of topics he offers, but also the fact that one can always discover new topics, for example, on logic in his works that one has never heard before. So there was no research on that. However, all three topics of the book I edited, philosophy of language, logic, and mathematics, in Schopenhauer's work have in common the fact that Schopenhauer is very skeptical about the axiomatization of logic and mathematics, and that he attributes everything to intuition and diagrammatic representation. I think that is a very unique topic for him. And several projects, just to look in the future, several projects are planned for the next few years. So the workshop Logic and Religion in Schopenhauer during the Third World Congress on Logic and Religion in Varanasi in India is planned. That is in November 2022. Furthermore, a project is planned for the influence of Schopenhauer on the law of Warsaw School and translation theory and heuristics. And in addition, a project on diagrams in Kantianism is to be launched next year, in which Schopenhauer naturally plays a central role. So in any case, I can say anyone interested in Schopenhauer's philosophy of language, logic, and mathematics is welcome to get in touch. And I'm always happy about collaboration and ideas. So that's all. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Jens, for your presentation. So once more, let me ask you if there are questions or remarks concerning this book. So maybe let me
just
break the ice.
Just 1 minute.
Okay.
I just want to point out that like every books of this book series, there is a print version and an online version. It's important to say. So if people wants to go to have the book online, all right. Thanks.
Okay. So meanwhile, there was a question in the chat. So a participant asked, could you please show the table of contents of the book? So yes, I think you are muted at the moment. Could you please activate your microphone?
Yes, so sorry. Well, yes, we have here 3 parts on that, as the title says. It's language, logic, and mathematics. And we have here Matthias Kossler and Michael Dobrechansky, a paper of mine, Gunnar Schumann, Sascha Dümich, linguist, and Michel Xines, working on abstract concepts in language philosophy. We have a part here on logic. Amirouche Moktefi wrote about Eulerian diagrams, Valentin Pluda about the historical context of Schopenhauer's logic. Hubert Martin Schüler came about the topic, what is natural, a largely discussed topic in Schopenhauer, what is a natural or what is a natural logic. That is a very long discussion in this book of Schopenhauer and this manuscripts. Anna-Sophie Heinemann from Paderborn, a student of, or from Volker Peckhaus, who wrote a chapter on the coordinational form of predication. So there is a formalism in Schopenhauer, which you can find. Lawrence Damey did a lot of on logical geometry and metalogic. That was a talk by the chapter by Jean-Yves Bizot I already showed. Then there were some discussions here in the mathematical chapter. So there's already a lot of things to do. That's just the beginning, to say so, to work on mathematics in Schopenhauer. That is by Marco Segala. He mainly put this Schopenhauer theory of mathematics in a historical context. Jason Costanzo from Midwestern University worked on intuition in proofs, and Michael Bevan from Oxford on diagrammatic proofs in math. And yeah, the last chapter we will hear about in a few minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. More questions? Okay, so just maybe a curiosity. So this book looks very interesting also because it is very interdisciplinary. So was it difficult, say, to coordinate experts and authors with so many different backgrounds and perhaps the styles of work? I don't know.
So I think it was in that moment a problem because there was no one who really worked on Schopenhauer and language, logic, and mathematics. So it needed some time in order to get these people the connection to all these researchers. But well, I think most are motivated because it was a new field, to say so. No one actually knew Schopenhauer as one of doing logic or math in that time. And well, so therefore there's a lot of things we could already do now with the basis of these talks and chapters, I would say. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much. So if there are no further questions, let me thank again Jens for his presentation. And now we proceed to the main talk of today, which is given by Laura Follesa, author of one of the chapters of the book we just presented, the chapter entitled From Necessary Truths to Feelings, the Foundations of Mathematics in Leibniz and Schopenhauer. As it is customary, let me give a somewhat longer introduction to the speaker. Laura Follesa has achieved a PhD in philosophy in 2014, jointly awarded by the University of Cagliari and the Friedrich Schiller University in Vienna. Since 2017, she has been a Marie Curie Fellow at the Institute for Cultural History of the Friedrich Schiller University. Her research interests include, besides the topics that are addressed in this talk, the philosophies of Kant and the German idealists, the reception of Plato in German philosophy, the 18th and early 19th century cosmologies, and the role of images, analogies, and metaphors in philosophy and science. So please, Laura.
Thank you for the kind presentation and also for the invitation to discuss my chapter. I'm gonna share my screen. Oh, sorry. From the first. Okay, so in this talk, I'm focusing on the relationship between Schopenhauer and Leibniz, and in particular, I'm focusing on the relevance of Leibniz's work for the development of Schopenhauer's theory of mathematical knowledge. Briefly, my talk is divided into 3 parts. In the first part, I analyze Schopenhauer's reading of Leibniz's work and show why Leibniz is an important source for the development of Schopenhauer's talk on mathematics. In particular, in this section, I'm considering the notion of innate knowledge and that of pure forms of reason. In the second part, I focus on Leibniz and Schopenhauer's evaluation of Euclid's system, and in particular, their critique of Euclid's axioms and postulates. A pivotal element of this section is the discussion on the role of images and the definition of confused knowledge. At the end, I will consider Schopenhauer's theory of intuition and explain why it is possible to say with Schopenhauer that we feel mathematical truths. In many parts of his work, Schopenhauer addresses Leibniz, as is usual, by a series of invectives and diminishes his importance as a philosopher, especially if compared to Kant. However, it is clear that Leibniz is an indispensable source for his studies. This is testified by the numerous works of Leibniz that Schopenhauer owned in his private library. He has a collection of Leibniz works in Latin and French and German, the biography of Leibniz, as well as his correspondence with other scholars of his time. And the most important thing is the fact that we are able to have a look at the samples of these works collected in these libraries, and that many of these works are exhibit plenty of handwritten underline marks and comments by Schopenhauer's hand. What is the most interesting is the fact that these annotations are often related to mathematical topics. Schopenhauer studied Leibniz, comparing different versions of his writings, and this provided him the starting point to display his vehement opposition to Leibniz ideas. In particular, what emerges from a detailed examination of Schopenhauer's handwritten comments and marks on Leibniz's works is his interest on the theoretical foundation of logical and mathematical knowledge, namely the possibility to know necessary truths, to access to necessary truths. So this was a topic that had been discussed not only by Leibniz, but also by his followers, from Christian Wolff to Moses Mendelssohn, both of whom Schopenhauer was also acquainted with. One of Leibniz's works that Schopenhauer have read and commented many times is the Nouveau Essai sur l'entendement humain, written by Leibniz in 1705 and published later. Here, Leibniz defines the pure mathematics as the sole discipline that provides necessary truths. These truths, Leibniz maintains, do not depend on instance, nor consequently on the testimony of the senses, even though without the senses, it would never occur to us to think of them. These are the principle of reason, and since they do not derive from sensible experience, they are innate and implicit in us. Our task, so Leibniz, is to carefully and methodically, I quote, find them within ourselves. Leibniz, as well as Mendelssohn after him, analyzes these ideas by taking into discussion in a polemical way Plato's recollection theory, namely the thesis that we have innate mathematical truths in ourselves, since we have learned them in a previous life. Schopenhauer was well acquainted with all these discussions and also annotated many passages regarding metempsychosis and recollection in his samples of Leibniz's works. Nevertheless, he approaches this topic partly through the perspective of Kantian critique of pure reason, so in a different way. The so-called metaphysical truths to which we assign the position of metaphysical first principle of natural science are, to Schopenhauer, the forms of all knowledge. They are innate, just in the sense that we know them a priori, since they are independent from experience. In his dissertation on the fourfold root of the principle of sufficient reason, Schopenhauer makes quite rarely use of the word innate. And in any case, with this meaning, I quote, all that is innate in the whole of our cognitive faculty, all that is therefore a priori and independent from experience, is strictly limited to the formal part of knowledge, that is, to the consciousness of the peculiar functions of the intellect and of the way in which they can possibly act. We acquire knowledge from the sensible experience, and its necessity depends on the form by which we necessarily acquire it. From this Kantian perspective, Schopenhauer maintains that the metaphysical foundation of all truths cannot lie in abstract propositions, but only in the immediate consciousness of the forms belonging to the presentational activity. Schopenhauer also specifies that the most universal forms of the phenomenon, namely space and time, upon which the procedures of mathematics are based, are modes of the principle of sufficient ground, or in other words, modes of the logical methods. It is then clear that logic and mathematics are linked, according to Schopenhauer, to the sensible and immediate experience, that it is only possible through pure forms of reason, namely through space and time. I am going to discuss now Leibniz and Schopenhauer's position on Euclid's mathematical system, and in particular on his axioms and postulates. In his Réflexions sur l'essai de Monsieur Locke, Leibniz maintains that Euclid used few axioms without considering them as primary and necessary truths and without any preliminary demonstration of them. He just started from these unproved propositions and built upon them a rigorous logically necessary concatenation. Leibniz's disapproval on Euclid's mathematical system relies on the fact that this system requires a more rigorous foundation, which is necessary and logical instead of being arbitrary, the result of an agreement and dependent on the senses. If we consider the case of the definition of parallel line as well, the postulate that tells that two straight lines can meet only once, both these assumptions do not rely on logical demonstration, but depend on our empirical perception and on imagination. Euclid's postulates are closely dependent on images deriving from the senses. This was the great mistake of Euclid's method, according to Leibniz. If we consider the point of view of Leibniz's theory of knowledge, images deriving from the sensitive experience can only produce confused knowledge that cannot be thoroughly demonstrated. So, according to Leibniz, Euclid had only confused perception of parallel and straight lines, since his definitions are provisory and not necessary, unclear and not distinct. Schopenhauer also defines Euclid's method as perverted. and leading to an obvious detriment of science, but for completely different reasons. Euclid set up a certain, I quote, arbitrarily chosen proposition, but gave a logical ground for cognizance of the latter through laborious logical proof following the principle of contradiction. So Schopenhauer continues that everything demonstrated by Euclid is the case has to be granted under compulsion of the principle of contradiction, but one does not learn why it is the case. Schopenhauer rooted the origin of the problem with Euclid's system in the rationalist endeavor to overtake the uncertainty of empirical knowledge and to ground the system on a pure logical basis. However, Schopenhauer maintains that after Kant's discovery of a priori intuition of space and time, we understand Euclid's logical mode of treatment of mathematical is a useless precaution. An improvement of mathematical method goes in a direction that is opposite to that suggested by Leibniz. Leibniz wished to provide a demonstration for the parallel postulate. Schopenhauer does not. In order to, I quote, in order to improve the mathematical method, it is preeminently required that one abandon the prejudice. The proven truth has some advantage over that of which one is perceptually cognizant, or logical truth resting on the principle of contradiction, some advantage over metaphysical truth, which is immediately evident and also includes the pure perception of space. It is necessary now to go back to the function of images and the notion of confused knowledge that we encountered in a previous section. According to Leibniz, we may have different kinds of perceptions that can be clear or distinct or obscure and confused. We mostly have confused perceptions since we have imperfect beings. Leibniz defined the confused ideas by means of concrete examples. We have a confused knowledge of a heap of stones, since we don't know exactly all its properties, namely the exact number of its stones. So since we don't have these distinct ideas of the properties of the heap, we can only know a confused knowledge. Knowledge is both clear and distinct when one can enumerate marks sufficient to distinguish one thing from another. According to Leibniz, almost every knowledge deriving from the senses of sight and the use of imagination does not provide distinct properties of an object and mainly creates a confused knowledge. Schopenhauer thoroughly analyzes this issue. Distinct ideas are the equivalent of abstract thought, independent from experience. Clear but confused ideas depend instead on intuition. On the fourfold roots, Schopenhauer focuses his attention on another juxtaposition between mental images on the one side and the immediate representation or intuitions on the other. Only these latter intuitions, according to him, can show reality. Schopenhauer states that the true kernel of all knowledge is not imagination, but reflection or thoughtful awareness, a notion that he probably found in the work of Johann Gottfried Herder on the origins of language, the notion of Besonnenheit. Schopenhauer wrote, "Another cognitive power has arisen in human beings alone among all inhabitants of the earth, an entirely new consciousness down that is called reflection and distinguishes human beings from animals. Every reflective abstract consciousness has his basis in intuitive representation and is the ground of all conceptions. But the immediate source of knowledge is intuition, in opposition to both mental images and abstract concept. In the heterogeneous category of feelings, we may find, I quote, perceptual cognizance of spatial relation a priori, as well as of all of that on the part of pure understanding. During Schopenhauer's time, other authors such as Friedrich Schleiermacher or Wilhelm Gottfried Tennemann affirm respectively the existence of a logical and mathematical feeling and the concept of feeling in mathematics. Schopenhauer quotes both these authors and affirms that only if the concept of feelings is conceived from the proper point of view, it is possible to avoid any kind of misunderstanding and disputes. We class, he said, under the concept of feelings, every modification of consciousness which is different from an abstract concept. So, according to Schopenhauer, feelings are truths of which we are first conscious only intuitively, and that we formulate in abstract concept only later. The evidence, I quote Schopenhauer, of mathematics, which has become a paradigm and symbol of all evidence, rests in its essence, not on proofs, but on immediate perception, which is thus here as everywhere the ultimate ground and the source of all truth. So immediate perception is a feeling. For instance, all of this differential calculus fails to broaden our cognizance of curves in any way, contains nothing more than is already contained merely in pure perception of them. But it changes the mode of cognition, transforms the intuitive into the abstract through reflection. It is also through then through the reading of Leibniz's work that Schopenhauer developed his theory of knowledge, in which he admits, on the one hand, the existence of a pure and innate knowledge, the pure forms of reasons, and assigns on the other a pivotal role to feelings, namely to an immediate intuition of things that includes an a priori mathematical perceptions. Thank you. That was all.
Thank you very much, Laura, for your presentation. There is a lot of time for discussion. So if you have questions, remarks, please mute yourself or ask your question in the chat. So there is, I see two raised hands. I think maybe Michal Dobrzański was the first, then Monia Reinhardt. Please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for this insightful presentation, and also to drawing our attention to this to the fact that Schopenhauer actually studied Leibniz a lot, because he really makes the impression of having studied a lot of mathematics, which we tend to oversee somehow. And I have actually a very, I think, specific question regarding the last part of your presentation, namely the question, what is this feeling in Schopenhauer precisely? You said that intuitive representation for him is actually the only source of knowledge, and I would go with that without doubt. But my question, with which I myself struggle a lot, is actually, what is this intuitive representation? And specifically, the question would be, do you think that there is a necessary component of sensory data which makes up the intuition, or can we have intuitions which do not have a component of sensory data? For example, you know, if you think of a object of geometry, like a triangle, you somehow, and this is in the fourfold root of the principle of sufficient reason, he uses such examples, right? He says we need to see, we need to visualize to understand what Euclid said, for example. But obviously, we don't need like drawings, I think. He's talking of some different kind of intuition, I think, which doesn't necessarily have a sensory data, because basically we are talking about objects that are created by our a priori forms of cognition, I think. So my question is, once again, do you think there is a necessary sensory, a component of sensory data which is necessary for us to have that intuition and in consequence to have that feeling?
Okay, if I clearly understand, thank you for your question. If I clearly understand it, I think the main difference here is to immediate intuition. So something that happens, simply happens, and it can be an external intuition, so what we directly see, or an internal intuition of what's happening within us. And on the other side, the mediate images, for example, and concept, abstract concept need a kind of a process, a mediation, because imagination is a productive force, so a productive faculty. So it is not what we imagine when visual thinking is not immediate. It's a mediate process. It's something that happens after we somewhere or someone have seen something. Then we reconstruct and reproduce those images. And the main difference between imagination and intuition is probably the distinction between immediate perception and approaches which needs a something that needs a mediation. I don't know if this was satisfying answer to your question, or if you need maybe more.
I would basically agree with you, but still there is this question of what you said. There is some kind of inner intuition, for example, right? Which is immediate. So if we have an immediate inner intuition, then it would mean that we don't need sensory data for it, right? Because
yes, for example, when we count this, we don't have, Schopenhauer says there is a difference between, for example, arithmetic and geometry. And we perceive this, we notice this difference because when we do arithmetics, we are following Kant, we are using the inner a priori form of time. So we simply count, and we don't need any external experience. With geometry is a little bit difficult to recognize the inner part, the pure formal side of this kind of knowledge, because we have images in ourselves. So we mixed, so to say, what derived from the senses, so the forms of space that we see in front of us and then in us, and the pure forms, a priori forms that we have, and that are the preconditions of what we see outside. So this is the difference that he remarks when he talks about images and pure intuition. The pure intuition doesn't need any experience, because it's what we have since its beginning. Since we are human beings, we have this form, and we only know through this form, a priori form. Yes, so this is the meaning also of immediate. If we have, if we build geometry or geometrical forms without any reference to images, we just make use of this form of space that we have as a precondition of our knowledge. This is
so thank you. So before moving to the next question, let me alert you to a message written in the chat by Matthias Kossler, where he gives more details on the Indian division of the Schopenhauer Society. So if you're interested in this topic, you can read more in the chat. So the next participant in the queue is Monia Reinhardt. So please.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. So I think my question or my point goes into a similar direction than Michael's question, because I'm also interested in this topic. I think one thing we might consider is that between Leibniz and Schopenhauer, there's Kant, and maybe Kant changes the terminology slightly. So of course it's based on Leibniz and Schopenhauer is based on Kant, but I think there might be slight differences in what Kant means when he introduces the term of pure representation, so reine Anschauung, and what Leibniz did before, because I think the point is that what you just answered to Michael was that in Kant we have the synthesis, the mathematical synthesis by means of space and time, so geometry and arithmetic. And Leibniz don't really have this notion of synthesis. Maybe there's something in it, but Kant introduces this Kantian way that Schopenhauer takes from him. And I think this maybe some kind of synthesis or pseudo-synthesis in Leibniz is the perspective. So I think for Leibniz it's very important to say that those innate ideas are necessary, and necessity is for Leibniz, it's universal perspective, so intersubjectivity or even objectivity. So he says in the Nouveau Essay that the necessity of the law of non-contradiction, for example, means that no one can seriously deny that. And I think this is something we don't need a kind of process or something else in order to agree on mathematical truth, because we don't have a chance to have different understandings of mathematical truth, because there's no perceptual or no sensory data that we use. And I think the problem with sensory data in Leibniz is that we have the perspective. So we have all those monads in Leibniz, and there's God, which is the universal monad, and then we are all small monads, and we have different perspectives on the world. So this is the sensory data is a kind of privatio, and I think this is the problem here. And in terms of mathematical truth, we don't have this privatio. So we can have an algebraic notation of a triangle, for example, and it's the same for all of us. So we don't have a perspective view on mathematical truths, but we have a perspective view on every kind of empirical data. And so this the question what means immediate. So for Kant, it has a sense of or flavor of being tensed. So we have a kind of extension in time. But I think in Leibniz, this is not the point. But this might be a question. So what's a proof for Leibniz and what's a proof for Kant? And I think there are slight differences in that. So maybe it's interesting to look what Schopenhauer really takes. So if he takes or if he has more of the Kantian terms or more of the Leibnizian terms.
Yeah, thank you. It's an interesting question because one of the problematic sides of your question is the fact that we only mention Leibniz, Kant, and Schopenhauer. But in fact, and I have in mind many other thinkers that influenced this debate. This is a really lively debate. And I have, for example, Herder in mind. And when I have Herder in mind, I have in mind the fact that Herder says that we are immersed like in an ocean, and this is also an image from Leibniz, an ocean of perceptions. So the immediateness of this perception is what probably Schopenhauer has in mind when he said immediate intuition. So we are like in the middle of a fullness of impulses, of perceptions, of intuitions. And the difference between Leibniz and the post-Kantian authors is evident. In Leibniz, the monads are in the middle of this ocean, but they are not able to identify every single drop of the ocean, every single monads, and so they are obliged to bound to have an obscure knowledge because it's a partial knowledge, it's just their point of view of the single monads, and so they are forced to perceive all the other monads as aggregates. So when Leibniz referred to logic truths, to necessary truths, he cannot refer to experience, to sensitive perception, because when he refers to this kind of perception, it is bound to say that it's confused. So only the logical, what is the logical truth? The logical truth is within the monad. So it's just something that each monad has in itself, and it derives directly from the monad of all monads. So the only God has this universal side, and the coincidence between truths of logic and truths of fact. But the single monad has the distinction between empirical knowledge and logical knowledge. So the logical knowledge must be independent from experience and so mathematics must start from this kind of thing, of logic, of truths. In Schopenhauer and post-Kantian thinkers, we have a completely different view of knowledge. So we have the necessity is connected with how human beings can know, and it's a part of the fact that we know through a priori forms. So this is the main distinction. It's a very important distinction between Leibniz and Schopenhauer, but also Leibniz and Herder. I don't know if it's okay to stop here, or if I can continue talking about Herder, because I don't know if we have time, or maybe other questions.
Okay, so in the queue there is just one other question asked by Michael or Michael Morganti, and I'm going to read it. Thank you for your presentation, Laura. I would like you to develop a little more about the concept of necessary truths. If for Schopenhauer, They're only the result of the processing by reason, reflection, Vernunft, of intuitive representations perceived. Sorry, I lost the perceived by our understanding, Verstand, then necessary truths go no further than the realm of sciences in general, which are limited in his view. The question thus is how ultimate truths about our existence, such as those expressed by the work of art, differ from the necessary truths. Are metaphysical truths such as these different in nature from necessary truths? Thank you.
Okay, no, I don't think we don't have this kind of difference. No, because the metaphysical truths, so in this perspective are the space and time and causal relations. So they are the forms, just the forms. So we use this form every time we approach to the phenomena. So fundamentally, that we don't have this difference.
Okay, so thank you. More questions or comments? So maybe I have a question myself. So I was very intrigued by the quote, the Schopenhauer quote that you showed us, where he says something like, I can't remember the exact wording, but he says like, we can take everything Euclid proves as granted, but he doesn't tell us why these mathematical truths hold. And this is, to my ears, this is strikingly similar to the reflections of one of Schopenhauer's contemporaries, namely Bolzano, where he contrasted this conception of mathematical proofs as means to transfer the evidence from the axioms to the theorems, to another conception that he endorses of mathematical proofs as means to show the grounds, the reasons why the mathematical theorems hold. So my question is this just a random resemblance, or could there be some historically robust link of path that connects in some way Schopenhauer and Bolzano?
Yeah, thank you. So it's a very interesting question. At the moment, I don't know any connection because I haven't been studied on Bolzano in this relationship, but thank you. So it's interesting. Yeah, I cannot say more than this. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much. So meanwhile, we have another question in the chat and the question and hand raised. So in the chat, Juan Campos asks, did Schopenhauer, read the scholastic logicians?
Okay. Also, I don't have a precise question that say, yeah, he read this and this author, but I'm sure that when he handled some literature like Leibniz or other logician mathematician of that period, so it of course had to do with, but a precise answer I don't have. Sorry.
So for a short while, there was a hand raised by Jens Lemanski. Did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, just a short question about what you think would be the perfect edition of Euclid Elements by Schopenhauer and by Leibniz. So an edition without any algebraic proof or something like any formalization, only the diagrams, the figures there, or what do you think? That is one of the questions I always have in mind when I read his treatises on mathematics. So how can we understand these figures without having any explanation in that? So that is one of the questions, and some other information I can say, since I of course, as the editor, I read all the papers also on logic, of course, on Schopenhauer, and I can say for the other question we have there, first for logic, Schopenhauer knew a lot of the scholastic logics, but he doesn't like them. He was mainly influenced by Kantian and Euler's logic, and what he wanted to do is to go back to Aristotle, having a very pure reading of Aristotle without any scholastic modes and so on in logic. That is one of his ideas, and only using diagrams. And what I can say is that Bolzano was influenced by Schopenhauer in his logic, like many other. They collaborated not directly, but they read their books, the one of the other. And there were a lot of other logicians between, so I can only say that for logic. A lot of other logicians at that time, Krause, for example, who worked very closely with Schopenhauer and Bolzano and so on, Bachmann and so on. And you can find a lot of information in the paper by Anna-Sophie Heinemann on that, if you're interested in that. That is one of the papers in the book. So you get a long list there of the contemporary books on logic that Schopenhauer read. Okay, so sorry, just for the information, my question was, what do you think? What would be a perfect edition? Have you any idea, or do you think that is a nonsense question?
So no, it's a very strange question, because I've never think about what is the answer. So they critique Euclid beginning of the system, but so to Leibniz, of course, we must look for a demonstration. So we must start from what is logic in itself. So we must, so to say, a term that he used, purge. So we must eliminate any thing that derive from the senses. Leibniz is quite sure that it must begin in this way. But I don't know, I cannot figure out completely why, how. And Schopenhauer, the problem is this. So a demonstration, when a demonstration starts from a point, then it can continue in a rigorous way. But that point must be immediately perceived. So how can a demonstration be written in a way that we have this kind of immediateness? So immediateness is only in the present, actual, live, we can say live perception, so the intuition. So it's difficult to say how a book or how a system. So a system is, the definition of system is already something that we elaborated, so it's not immediate. But of course, Schopenhauer has to do or to compete with the idealist, the German idealist. So the Hegelian definition of how we can start, how we can begin a system from a logical point of view. So he has to somehow opposite his own view to that of the idealists that start from an abstract knowledge. So this is what can I say about your strange question? Sorry.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. So there is another question in the chat. So how was the Schopenhauer criticism of Euclid's Axiomatics received in his time?
Okay. No, also this point, I don't know, even I don't exactly know the debate. We must maybe go deeper into this debate, because usually when some of these philosophers, Schopenhauer or the idealists, at that time has a polemic or has a polemical object, it is not a single author that develop this point. So it is probably, but I don't know exactly who, that many other contemporaries are focusing also by reading Leibniz on the problem of Euclid axiomatics. So it's a very debated topic, but now I'm not in the position of giving more information about this debate. So.
Okay, thank you. Yes, you have a further question.
Sorry, just a short comment, because there was some research or is some research on that, and it's not really finished how this the mathematics of Schopenhauer is received. As far as we know in the moment, it was very good received until the 1880s. So there were a lot of people working with Schopenhauer mathematics. One of the most famous, some German mathematicians and maybe some Germans in general will know the name is Adolf Diesterweg. There are a lot of Diesterweg schools in German, and Diesterweg is one of the ones who use a lot of Schopenhauer and his mathematics. And that went until the 1880s. There were a lot of mathematicians, for example, also Gauss, who was influenced by Schopenhauer and its mathematics. And then there came the Weierstrass school, and they hated this geometric and intuitive kind of reasoning you found in Schopenhauer. And then you have a very negative reception. Felix Klein, for example, in 1900 around, and so on. And that is something which goes on, I would say, until the 1990s. And nowadays, Schopenhauer is sometimes received in didactics of mathematics. So that is all I can say, but it's not, that is nothing which is completely researched in the moment. That is an ongoing research on the reception of Schopenhauer's mathematics in that time.
So thank you. More questions or comments? I can't see any question in the chat. No one raised their hands as far as I can see. Let's wait some more seconds.
Please, just a comment on last remark, Jens Lemanski's remark. Please, Professor Lemanski, could you please write down the names of these researchers in philosophy of mathematics and Schopenhauer's philosophy of mathematics in the chat, so I can get the right type in to look further information on them, please?
Yes, there is an article on the reception of Schopenhauer's mathematics in the Schopenhauer Handbuch, which was published a few years ago. So you can have a look. There's a longer list, but not a complete list of what is known in the moment. But some of the main authors there. I give you a reference to this chapter, if you like. I put it in the chat. That's in the Schopenhauer Handbuch, edited by Matthias Kossler and Daniel Schuber.
Okay, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
More questions or remarks? So we are past the 90 minutes mark. So if there are no further questions, let me congratulate on the speaker for this very interesting presentation, and let me thank her and all the other speakers of today, and thank all the participants for coming. Jean-Yves, would you like to add some closing remarks?
Well, thank you to everybody. It was a very nice session today. And I just want to say a few words about the next session, which will be next week, which in some sense will be a continuation of this one in two ways, because we will have an Indian session by Ritu, which from India, and a presentation of the Calcutta Logical Circle. And it's an opportunity to remember that Schopenhauer was one of the first philosophers in Europe to have interest for Indian philosophy and religion. This was not the main topic of today, but it's good to recall that. And the talk will be on diagram. So it's also connected to what Jens was talking today about the fact that Schopenhauer had a strong interest for diagramming in logic. So next week, at the same time, we'll have this talk by Ritu.